Hello, guys, and welcome to the Little House on the Prairie Season 4 review. Um, I want to thank everyone in my Facebook group of Little House on the Prairie fans for giving me the confidence to do these reviews and the fact that you all love them. I am grateful and happy. Also, want to thank one of my best friends, Betty, for also loving my reviews. Um, Thank you for giving me the confidence to do these because they're fun and I enjoy doing them. And I'm becoming more confident the more that I do them because they're fun. Okay, so season 4 for me is a mixed bag of all kinds of things. In season 1, we had an introduction of one off characters that didn't seem to go anywhere. In season 2, we started to have some continuity and things that we followed into season 3. In season 3, we seem to have a balance, of happy, sad, filler, funny, those types of things. In season 4, we don't seem to have that. And like I said in my last review of season 3, if you all have seen that, Victor French left the show at the end of season 3. And unfortunately, due to multiple sources that I have consulted on the internet, um, he left the show to pursue other projects. And does not come back until almost the end of the series, I'm guessing. I'm not entirely sure when he comes back. I remember him coming back, but I couldn't tell you when. But my theory is that he did not give them enough time to actually give his character a proper exit. In the first episode of season 4, there's just a throwaway line that says, Edwards moved out west, and that's it. There's nothing, no other explanation given for his absence other than that. Which, I don't understand. Why would they do that? Anyway, so Mr. Edwards is gone, Grace is gone, Alicia and Carl are gone. They're no longer there. And the first episode of season 4 is loaded. It is loaded. There's a lot of stuff going on in that first episode. And I don't understand why, because they've never done that before. Basically, we hear that Mr. Edwards has moved out west. We get introduced to the Garvey family. Andy, Alice, and Andrew Garvey. And we get introduced to them just like we would any one-off character that we're supposed to suspend our disbelief. We're supposed to pretend that they've been there this whole entire time, even though they have not. Mr. Garvey's already working at the mill and acts like he's been working there for years. Him and Charles are friends and they act like they've been friends for years. And there's no backstory given to them. There's no, how did they come to Walnut Grove? When exactly did they start becoming friends with the Ingalls family? There's no, there's no introduction, no proper introduction. They're just sort of sandwiched into this already loaded episode. We then get introduced to Hermione Bentley's character, whose character name I can't pronounce, but she's the woman in the pretend house. You all remember her. And Hermione Bentley is known for being in the original Mary Poppins and the sitcom Maude. She's a very funny actress. And she's playing a woman in a pretend house with a door and a chimney and a fruit cellar. But unfortunately, and then there's this one-off line where they go, well, the property was condemned, we can't make her leave. What property? This is literally on the right side of the church/school, and there was no house or anything there. So I don't understand, you know, what are they talking about? What was this property? So that's a little continuity issue there. And another continuity issue is the fact that we don't see a bank. The bank is not there. Mr. Spray is not mentioned until the series finale. And in the exterior shots, when they're going into town for church or something, we don't see the bank ever anymore. I don't understand. Where did it go? Um, and if that wasn't enough, if the Garvey family getting introduced, if the woman in the pretend house wasn't enough, we then get the exit of Jack the dog and the introduction of the new dog, Bandit, all within the span of 45 minutes in the first episode of season 4. I kid you not. Um, and all in the span of one episode. And I thought they were separate episodes, but it's like one episode completely together and all that's happening. And it doesn't help matters that Laura is really mean to Jack. Apparently he has something called box tails in his fur and she has to get him out. But she doesn't get him out right away, and I guess he dies as a result. I don't know. Um, but she's like mean to him, and then he dies, and she's all sad. And then Bandit comes and wants to be her dog because he follows Paul home from Mankato by jumping on the wagon and staying in the back until they're almost to Walnut Grove, where he reveals himself. And Paul calls him Bandit. Um, but after that, Laura doesn't want to acknowledge his presence, doesn't want him there with her, and it takes the woman in the pretend house to basically point out to her that Bandit just wants to be loved and wants some kindness. And she, you know, falls in love with the lady in the pretend house, and she begs everyone in town to let her stay. And according to the voiceover at the end of the episode, Bandit became Laura's dog for the rest of his days, and the woman in the pretend house stayed with them until her dying day. But unfortunately, she only appears in one other episode of season 4, and so far I've started season 5 and she's not been referenced at all. So don't know what's going on there. And here's a testament to the balance I was talking about. So we go from this loaded first episode to an episode entitled Times of Change. Mary and Charles decide to go to the big city. Mary to see John Jr., because remember, they're still boyfriend and girlfriend. He got a scholarship in the last season to go to the big city and was going to marry Mary, but unfortunately wanted the scholarship and wanted to go off and write more. So he's off in the big city, and Mary decides to go visit him with Paul, who becomes a representative in the farmers' convention. But he finds out that the city is not the best place because they're sending prostitutes to his door. He gets a beautiful, fancy hotel room, and he's supposed to vote a certain way, so of course he doesn't want to be a part of it. Mary finds out that John Jr. is nothing but a cheat. He invites her to a cotillion as well as another girl, and has been cheating on her this whole entire time. So it's a very interesting episode, but she meets a nice boy on the train that continues in Meet Me at the Fair, which I'll talk about here in a minute. After this episode, we then find ourselves back in Walnut Grove. A girl named Ellen goes swimming with Laura and Mary, and when they find that the boys are looking at them, they dive underwater, and Ellen never comes back up. She unfortunately drowns. Ellen's mother blames Laura, Reverend Alden, and Ellen's father, sorry. And the woman goes through the various stages of grief, and she deserved an Emmy Award. I have no idea who played the mother. But this is the balance I'm talking about. We go from having that loaded episode to times are changing, and then we're back in Walnut Grove, and we're in this serious episode about the grief process. And then the woman ends up kidnapping Laura because she keeps seeing her Ellen in Laura. And then we get introduced to Bugsy, a character who's either mute or deaf or something. Charles tells the girls to avoid his farm or avoid his place when they go to and from school because he's a weird guy. Um, and Ellen's mother decides to plant Laura's things at his house to make it look like he took Laura or did something to her. Um, and the town gets so involved, they're chasing Bugsy, and Ellen's father shoots him, even though he's done nothing wrong. In the end, Laura is able to convince Ellen's mother that Ellen is dead and that she's not Ellen, and Paul finds her in time. But, I mean, it was a good episode. The acting was good. Episode after that is Handyman, which Melissa Sue Anderson said she was embarrassed about her performance in the Whisper County, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. But she should be embarrassed about her performance in The Handyman. The Handyman sees Charles out of town doing some sort of job in Mankato for Mr. Hanson, putting out some lumber for something, and it's a big, huge order he has to fill. And he hires a handyman to basically put an addition to the kitchen so that Ma will have water in the house and have a bigger space to cook and stuff. And he hires this handyman starts doing the job, and he falls in love with Ma. And it's kind of like Mirror of For My Lady in season two, I believe, where Charles does all that work for this woman and Caroline thinks he's having an affair. Well, Mary thinks her mother is having an affair when Caroline almost slips and the handyman catches her, and he's wearing Paul's shirt from the Christmas at Plum Creek that Mary made him, and she just goes off on Ma with both barrels and then tells the handyman to go away because she knows that he's in love with her mother. It's not a good episode. I didn't really like it. I'm sorry, I just didn't. I didn't like the way that Mary treated Ma in that episode because she should have more confidence in her. The next episode, we have The Wolves, which that was an episode, according to the actor Merlin Olsen, who played Mr. Garvey, was written specifically for Victor French. But he got to do it, and I watched this interview with him where he was a football player before he started playing Mr. Garvey, and he had to learn, how to play up your emotions in one scene, how to play down your emotions, which I know all about that. Was in theater, was in drama class, and he had to hit his mark and everything. And the cast taught him and was really, nice to him. And he said that by the third day, he had not realized he was filling the shoes of Victor French, who had left the show. And then he was like, so nervous. And he was like, oh no, But The Wolves is a weird episode because the title is misleading. It has to do with wolves, but not really. And we get introduced to this one-off character that we never see again, who apparently doesn't like Mr. Garvey. They had some sort of dispute with some land, but there's nothing. Nothing is fully explained about that. So why even put it in the episode or bring it up? Because it never gets explored later on. Anyway, the man is putting down wolf tracks, wolf traps, and one of the wolves and her cubs get stuck, and Andy decides to take care of the wolves. And when Nellie overhears them talking about it, she tells the man, and he decides to go and shoot them on Mr. Garvey's farm, which used to be Mr. Edwards' farm. Paul and Ma decide to leave town and leave Mary in charge, and Mary is downright, ridiculous in this episode too, acting more like Laura's mother than her sister, but that's, how older siblings do. And it turns out that it's not the wolves that are like eating people's chickens and such, it's wild dogs. And that's what attacked them, not the wolves. The wolves end up saving them, so that's why the title's misleading. It's an interesting episode, but the title was misleading. So the next episode after that is The Creeper of Walnut Grove, which this was apparently written for Carl and Laura, not for Andy and Laura, and you can slightly tell. Someone in town is stealing stuff from the Olsen's mercantile, stealing chickens, stealing all kinds of stuff, and Laura and Andy decide to become detectives. They do different tricks, like knocking paint on Charles, knocking Mrs. Olsen down, putting paint on Mr. Olsen. It's a hilarious episode. And the creeper turns out to be a guy who is trying to get a scholarship to be a doctor. And once they find this out, the town rallies together to help him, and there's no repercussions for his actions. And I don't know if he comes back as a doctor or not. But I don't know if he ever comes back in town to, as a doctor. I don't know. But next, we have To Run and Hide. Doc Baker, is treating a woman who has just become pregnant. She's had miscarriages before, and the man, her husband, falls down when preparing a roof. And at close examination, he seems fine. But then later, he dies. Doc Baker feels that his confidence as a doctor has slipped and he has failed, so he decides to become a farmer. In the end, the woman wants him as her doctor because the doctor that comes to Walnut Grove to replace Doc Baker is a jerk. In the end, Doc Baker becomes a doctor again. But good acting by the actor that plays Doc Baker. Then we have the episode The Aftermath, okay? Which concerns Jesse James and his brother Frank James, and also features the guy that will end up killing Jesse James. The problem is that I watched a documentary about Jesse James, and this episode is not historically accurate. Mary Ingalls was never kidnapped or held hostage by Jesse James in the house that will eventually become the Blind School. They were never in Walnut Grove, Minnesota. They were around Minnesota in the woods, but never in Walnut Grove. According to the documentary I watched and according to multiple sources I looked up specifically for this review. It's a good episode. It's interesting. An interesting take on the whole Jesse James phenomenon thing. But still, not historically accurate. Then we have the episode The High Cost of Being Right. Merlin Olsen, who played Jonathan Garvey, said in the interview that I watched on YouTube that this episode was written specifically for Victor French. How this would work with the Edwards family, I'm not entirely sure. But we were not properly introduced to the Garvey family, so we unfortunately don't really know them enough to be invested in this story. Basically, the barn catches on fire. Mr. Garvey had harvested the crop that was going to get him a bunch of money to be able to, buy a bunch of stuff and have a plentiful harvest or season or whatever, and it all gets ruined when the barn catches on fire. And he ends up almost dying himself while trying to put the fire out. When times seem tough, he won't accept any charity from anyone, and Alice Garvey decides to fill the post previously filled by Grace when she was on the show at the post office. But unfortunately, Jonathan, being as prideful as he is, thinks that by her working means that she has no confidence in him to get a job or to do anything. So, they start fighting. And it goes so far as to they decide to get a divorce because they won't see the other side. And we don't know them enough to understand whose side we should be on. Merlin Olsen acknowledges that this episode is probably pretty dated due to the fact that it's a man not wanting his wife to work. And I completely agree. In the end, Alice continues working at the post office and everything goes on as if nothing bad had happened. So, there you go. Then we have an episode entitled The Fighter. This episode barely features the Garvey family, barely features the Ingalls family, and focuses on a man named Mr. Hobbs, a fighter who's been fighting most of his life. His wife, played by the future actress that will play Esther Sue, um, tells him that he needs to give it up because it's not a good life for him or for their son. He refuses, she leaves him. Then we go several years later, he goes to Walnut Grove, challenges anyone to knock him down in the ring. Mrs. Olsen encourages Mr. Olsen to sign up. He gets knocked out completely. And then Mr. Garvey decides to do it. And he doesn't flare very well. And then Charles gets into the ring and is able to knock Mr. Hobbs out. But it turns out that Mr. Hobbs is in poor health, and his manager, who's been exploiting him for years, decides to leave him because he's of no use to him anymore. Charles ends up nursing Mr. Hobbs back to health, and he decides to become a farmer. He eventually goes to the city to get a deed to some land, finds his son there, and finds his old manager trying to exploit him like he exploited Mr. Hobbs. So he gets into the ring with his son, proves his son cannot fight, and decides to go back to Walnut Grove to be a fighter, never telling his son that he's his father. I thought this was like a backdoor pilot, but unfortunately it wasn't. And apparently, according to people in my Facebook group, Mr. Hobbs comes back to Walnut Grove and becomes Esther Sue's husband, apparently. Which I've never seen that, so we shall see. So then after that, we get the episode Meet Me at the Fair, where Mary is getting fussed over by two different men. The boy that she met on the train in Times Are Changing, and another boy that owns a hot air balloon. This episode is notorious for being known for two things. One, it focuses on a pickpocket who is basically stealing people's wallets and money all day long, and another older woman who ends up stealing all the things that he stole throughout the day. And then it's also known for the episode where Carrie gets stuck in a hot air balloon because the boy from the train, who we never see again after this episode, gets jealous of the hot air balloon guy and sends it into the air as revenge. And Carrie just so happens to be sleeping in the bottom of it. So they have to rescue her. But in the end, of course, she's fine. And Mary chooses the boy from the train because the guy with the hot air balloon only cares about his hot air balloon. Never mind the fact that it wouldn't have been in the air if the boy from the train, didn't set it up there. But that's okay. We never see him again. Who even cares? Or what does it matter? Then after Meet Me at the Fair, we have Here Comes the Brides. Now, I think I read this in Alison Armgren's book, Confessions of a Prairie Bitch. This episode was written specifically for Melissa Sue Anderson, and it was supposed to be a long story arc sort of thing. She was going to marry this country bumpkin. Charles was going to be opposed to it, and there was going to be this big thing attached to it. But Melissa Sue Anderson had grown tired of all of Mary's love interest and said no. So they reworked the episode, wrote it with Nellie in mind, and instead of having Nellie marry the country bumpkin, they had Miss Beadle marry his father, and she becomes Mrs. Sims instead of Miss Beadle. So there you go, and it's such a great episode, I love it. Mrs. Olsen shoots with a gun, and she shoots the ceiling, and it's hilarious, I love it. Then we have a really strange episode that I've never seen syndicated on TV called Freedom Fight. Native Americans come to town asking for a white doctor to save their Indian chief, and Doc Baker volunteers, and the Indians end up hiding out at Charles's house because the bunch of racists in town want them out. And Laura wonders why people are so opposed to people who are different. A question I'm still asking to this very day. It was a good episode, but really doesn't have anything to do with the Ingalls family story as a whole. Then we have The Rivals. And this episode, Laura is in love with a boy and decides to do everything in her power to make herself look more like a girl because she's always doing stuff that a boy would do. She takes her hair out of pigtails for the first time, and she asks Mary when she's gonna get bumps, meaning boobs. She's like, you have them and Nellie Olsen has them. She even asks Nellie what to do and how to attract a man after what happened in Here Comes the Brides. Even though we never see the boy she falls in love with again, and I guess she's over it now. Um, we don't even get to see Mr. Sims either. But anyway, um, Laura ends up putting apples in her dress to make it look like she has bumps, and they end up falling out when Mrs. Sims asks her to come up to the board to write out problems. It's a really funny episode, but kind of sad, too. And a subplot that goes nowhere. Mr. Garvey and Charles end up getting jobs, but realize they'd rather be home with their families. Then we have the episode that Melissa Sue Anderson is embarrassed about, Whisper County. This episode has Mary doing her first teaching job because apparently she wanted to be a teacher, which was not expressed in season 3, 2, or 1. And she gets a first job in a sheltered community where a woman is feared. Her name's Miss Peel, and whatever she says goes. Everyone takes everything she says at face value. They have no idea who the President of the United States is. And when a boy ends up doing a pass at Mary and she slaps him across the face, Miss Peel misinterprets the situation and causes trouble for Mary. Mary ends up leaving. And then she ends up crying it out and saying, I have to go back. Someone has to stand up to her. Coffee. And, Mary stands up to her and we find out that Miss Peel can't read and that everything she's been telling the town for years has been a lie. But there's all this tension, all this build-up to this very moment, and nothing happens. And we don't find out if the town was liberated or educated or Miss Peel learned to read or anything. I don't even get the point of this episode, but I don't think her acting was over the top. It was warranted. It was good. She should be embarrassed about the handyman. I don't like the way she treats Mom that episode. Okay, the next one is I Remember, I Remember. It is Charles and Caroline's wedding anniversary, and Charles is stuck in the rain, so Ma tells them about when she first met Charles. Matthew Limericks, hopefully I said that right, is back as young Charles, and this is his last episode because in season 5 he will be back as Albert. And it's a good episode. Then there's another episode I've never seen syndicated on TV called Be My Friend. A girl who has a very strict religious father, that could have been Carrie White's father, ends up, she falls in love with a boy, and she gets pregnant, and she hides it from her father, has her baby in the woods, sends a bunch of, notes in glass bottles to get Laura to be her friend, and Laura finds the baby, takes care of it, learns what it's like to be a mother, names it Grace. No, this is not about baby Grace, and ends up giving the baby back to her in the end. Such a great episode, great acting, so wonderful. Don't know why it's never on TV, because I don't ever remember seeing that episode. Then, The Inheritance. Charles thinks he's inheriting a great deal of money from a rich uncle, and he ends up buying a bunch of stuff, putting the cart before the horse. Ha ha ha. See? I know. Lame. But it was there. And, basically, he inherits a bunch of debt. So it's not good. But it's a funny episode. And then we have The Stranger, where a prince comes to Walnut Grove to learn what it's like to be a farmer, and Charles teaches him the ways of being a farmer. It's a really interesting episode. And then we have The Most Precious Gift. Mrs. Sims finds out that she's pregnant. Mary is basically gearing up to replace her as the teacher in Walnut Grove. And Caroline gets pregnant too, but she's worried about giving Charles a boy because of what happened to Charles Jr. in season 1. She even visits his grave. But in the end, she gives birth to Grace Ingalls, and Now we're to the series finale where Mary becomes blind. If you haven't noticed, there is no foreshadowing of Mary's blindness. None of the episodes I talked about foreshadow it at all. It just comes completely out of left field. It's like in the most precious gift, she's happy that she's just got a new sister, and then in this episode her eyes are tired and she needs new glasses, and the new glasses don't work, and the guy basically says, oh, she had scarlet fever, oh, she's becoming blind. You have to tell her, because eventually she won't be able to see at all. I know this is hard, Mr. Ingalls, but you have to tell her. And when he tells her, it's like so sad, and then the moment when she realizes she's blind, oh my god, so sad. And she was nominated for an Emmy, but she did not win for this episode. Which is sad, because she deserved it. Her acting was so good in that episode. And there's a subplot going on in that episode where the railroad has stopped running, the town isn't getting the supplies they need, so the town is basically slowly shutting down. This is the last season for Miss Beadle, aka Mrs. Sims, whose husband cannot earn a living in the town. She says goodbye to Mary, and Mary decides to be a teacher at the blind school instead of being a regular teacher. And we get introduced to Kendall in the second part of the episode, in the season finale. Such great acting. Overall, season 4 has some slightly strange episodes that don't string well together, but you can criticize something and still love it. I can watch these episodes over and over again and love them each and every time. So I love season 4, I just wish the episodes would have been a little bit balanced a little bit more. And that the Garvey family and the Edwards family got a proper exit and introduction. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review of season 4 as much as I enjoyed doing it. Thank you so much for watching my reviews, and remember, as Laura said, home is the nicest word there is, and I'll see you in the next one.